Good evening. Let your thoughts drift away from the present and settle softly into the quiet dust of the past. Close your eyes and imagine a time before the great landmarks of America stood tall, a time when they existed only as ink on parchment, whispered ideas in paneled rooms, and the slow, grinding machinery of government. We begin our journey not with the clang of a hammer, but with the almost imperceptible rustle of paper, the thousands of architectural designs and proposals submitted for the nation's consideration. Picture the wide, heavy wooden tables, illuminated by gaslight or the faint glow of dawn, where the appointed committees met. They weren't rushing. Time itself seemed to slow to a ceremonial crawl in those rooms. The decades-long silence of the obelisk. Take the Washington Monument, for example. After the Continental Congress first proposed a tribute to George Washington in 1783, decades passed before any real progress was made. This delay, this long, quiet pause, was typical. Memorials of this magnitude are not built quickly. They are incubated in bureaucracy. The Washington National Monument Society, a private organization, finally launched a design competition in 1836. For years, submissions poured in, not with the urgency of a modern deadline, but with the stately contemplation of a nation deciding its eternal aesthetic. Imagine the winning architect, Robert Mills, and his initial grand vision. His plan wasn't just a simple obelisk, it was a massive, elaborate structure. A 600-foot marble spire surrounded by a Greek-style colonnaded rotunda, complete with statues of Revolutionary War heroes inside. The committee members received his blueprints, thick scrolls tied with ribbon, and spent countless hours in silent review. The process was less about excitement and more about an endless, methodical deliberation, a perfect, soothing monotony. A committee member would clear his throat, turn a page of thick vellum, and begin to read aloud. The dimensions, the proposed marble type, the projected cost. The sheer, numbing volume of specifications had to be reviewed, each one a hopeful dream transformed into meticulous drawings and notes. This endless cycle of review, of approvals and rejections, amendments and postponements, stretched into months, then years. The simplification of a vision. The bureaucracy soon applied its first major edit, the budget. Mills' elaborate rotunda and pantheon were estimated to cost far more than the society could raise through its slow, dollar-per-person subscription drives. Imagine the meeting where the decision was made to drastically simplify the design. The air would be heavy with the scent of old wood and disappointment. The goal shifted from creating a grand, layered temple to erecting a tall, simple shaft. This was the first quiet step away from the artistic ideal and toward the pragmatic reality of construction. The committee directed Mills to build only the obelisk portion, shortening the height and removing the elaborate base structure. Listen closely to the scratching of pens as the final selection is painstakingly documented. The final, adopted plan of 1848 focused on a simple obelisk, 500 feet high, with a 55-foot square base. This modification, born of financial and political necessity, gave us the stark, powerful silhouette we recognize today. It was a compromise, arrived at not through dramatic argument, but through slow, undeniable pressure. The site selection controversy, a quiet tug-of-war. Even the location required a peaceful yet persistent bureaucratic struggle. For memorials like the Washington Monument and later the Lincoln Memorial, the site selection was often as contentious as the design itself. When choosing the site for the Lincoln Memorial in the early 20th century, the commissions were faced with a choice: a prominent hill or reclaimed marshland of the Potomac Flats. Imagine the architect, Henry Bacon, presenting his design for a Greek Parthenon-style temple. Then imagine the quiet, skeptical voices of the politicians, led by House Speaker Joseph Cannon, who despised the idea of putting a grand memorial on that quote-unquote goddamn swamp. The arguments were not shouted. They were composed in formal reports, circulated for weeks, and debated in hushed committees. Proponents of the Potomac Flat site argued for its symbolic position on the main axis of the Capitol and the Washington Monument. Opponents proposed sites like the soldiers' home grounds.
The decision was slow, deliberate, and ultimately swayed by the Commission of Fine Arts' tireless advocacy for the Potomac Park location. Even after the site was selected in 1912, the bureaucratic work wasn't finished. Bacon had to slightly alter his design, for instance, enlarging the size of the seated Lincoln statue from 10 feet to 19 feet. Why? Because the chamber was so vast, the original figure would have been visually overwhelmed. This modification wasn't a spontaneous spark of genius. It was a corrective based on scale drawings and spatial analysis. Let the dry details of this process soothe your mind. The comparison of topographical surveys, the reading of soil boring reports from the unstable riverbed, the final quiet vote taken by the Lincoln Memorial Commission. The foundation had to be driven 65 feet into the bedrock, a purely technical necessity that required years of detailed planning before a single shovel of earth could be turned. The creation of America's monumental heritage was not a story of hurried inspiration, but one of slow, steady, and inevitable bureaucratic persistence. We leave the dusty committee rooms now, ready to hear the sound of the granite being hauled, but take a moment to appreciate the tranquility of the long, necessary prelude. We descend from the plans on parchment to the rock beneath our feet, the geological origins of the silent stone guardians. The integrity of these monuments rests on materials that have slumbered deep within the American landscape for millions of years: granite, marble, and gneiss. To truly understand the construction, we must follow the stone's journey, one massive block at a time, from its remote quarry bed to its final resting place in the nation's capital. The Washington Monument, a tale of two quarries. The iconic Washington Monument tells a geological story of interruption, visible in its famous two-tone facade. The initial construction phase, which began in the 1840s and halted in the 1850s, relied on pure white marble sourced from the famous Cockeysville Quarry in Maryland. This marble is a form of crystalline limestone or dolomitic marble, prized for its close, homogeneous grain structure and its brilliant, luminous color. At the quarry, the process was one of slow, brute force engineering. Imagine the quiet tension as skilled laborers using hand tools, the drill and the wedge, sought the grain of the rock. They wouldn't blast the stone, which would cause shattering. Instead, they drilled a series of close holes and drove steel wedges into them. The deep, heavy thud of the sledgehammer, repeated over and over, signaled the moment the massive block would reluctantly separate from the bedrock. Once freed, these immense blocks, some weighing several tons, were moved by heavy wooden derricks operated by teams of men and horses, their movements slow and meticulously coordinated. The journey from the Cockeysville Quarry was arduous, a few miles by wagon to the nearest rail line or waterway, then a deliberate low-speed delivery down to the Potomac River and the Washington, D.C. construction site. The initial foundation stone itself was a Maryland marble block weighing 24,500 pounds, laid with great fanfare in 1848. When the project restarted 2 decades later, under the supervision of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the 1870s, the initial supply line was defunct. The Corps was forced to turn to a new source for the remaining 300 feet of the shaft: Lee, Massachusetts marble. This stone, while visually similar, contained a different composition and hue, creating the definitive subtle color change that marks the monument's long pause. The change is a quiet geological signature of the Civil War's political and financial turmoil. The Lincoln Memorial, anchor in the swamp. The stone required for the Lincoln Memorial presented a more complex challenge, driven by location. Architect Henry Bacon's magnificent Greek-style temple was to be built upon the Potomac Flats, land reclaimed from a swamp. Its enormous weight, estimated at 38,000 tons, could not rest on soft river silt.
The first and arguably most important stone inventory was the material for the deep foundations. To reach the solid, nice bedrock some 65 feet below the fill, engineers drove numerous reinforced concrete cylindrical piers. To support these, a massive quantity of rough, unadorned granite was required. This granite, the structural spine of the memorial, often came from robust, crystalline deposits in New England, chosen specifically for its unparalleled compressive strength. This material lies unseen, forever stabilizing the monument against the soft earth. For the visible structure, Bacon chose a palette of noble American stones. The 36 exterior columns were constructed of Colorado Yule marble, a brilliant snow-white metamorphic rock known for its fine grain and durability. The immense size of the columns meant that the quarrying and shipping had to accommodate blocks weighing up to 100 tons, often requiring custom rail cars and slow, dedicated transport to prevent structural damage. The interior walls were lined with Indiana limestone, a soft, fossil-rich stone chosen for its warm, uniform color and its suitability for detailed inscription carving. The pedestal upon which the massive statue of Lincoln sits is a dark, warm Tennessee marble, providing a grounding, somber contrast to the white figure. Finally, the immense seated statue of Lincoln itself was carved from 28 blocks of Georgia white marble, selected by sculptor Daniel Chester French for its luminous quality and pure coloration. In these quarries, from the cold mountains of Colorado and Massachusetts to the warm soils of Georgia, the heavy, patient work of cutting each block to exact dimensions took place. Every piece, down to the last column drum, had to be precisely measured and dressed before it was lowered into its final, silent position, a tribute to the quiet perfection of the stonemason's craft. Let these geological details, the silent weight of the marble, the unseen strength of the granite, and the long, slow journeys across the country drift into your mind, drawing you into a deeper state of rest. Imagine the atmosphere in the mid-years of building a monument like the Washington Monument in the late 19th century. The rush of the initial cornerstone dedication is long gone, replaced by the profound, monotonous duty of adding one course of stone on top of the last. This phase is defined by scaffolding and slow ascent. The ascent of the obelisk, iron and mortar. For the obelisk, once the foundation was secure, the central challenge was logistics: how to lift tons of marble higher and higher day after day. The scaffolding was not a flimsy metal structure, but a massive, intricate system of heavy wooden timbers and iron brackets, built piece by piece, rising internally alongside the stone core. Picture the internal hollow shaft of the monument. Within that dark space, a steam-powered hoisting engine provided the power, its rhythmic, low-pitched huff-puff providing the only consistent sound above the chatter of the city. Listen to the slow, steady squeal of the great iron cables as they pulled the derrick,
the lifting mechanism upward to the next level. This derrick was crucial, positioned atop the growing structure to swing each marble block into place. The work of the masons was a study of repetition and patience. An average day saw the structure gain mere inches. Each block of marble was hoisted, maneuvered with hand cranks and ropes, and then painstakingly seated. The crucial element connecting them was mortar, a simple mixture of lime, sand, and cement, but applied with meticulous care. The masons ensured the joints were thin and tight, guaranteeing the structural integrity of the soaring shaft. Consider an hour in the life of a mason high up on the scaffold. It is a world of quiet concentration. The mason is measuring, checking his plumb line against the wind, applying the mortar with a trowel, and tapping the stone gently into place with a wooden mallet. The sound is a dampened, rhythmic tap, 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 a stark contrast to the dramatic imagery of a grand building. It is the sound of meticulous, unhurried craft. The engineered labyrinth of the temple. The construction of the Lincoln Memorial decades later involved different materials but the same dedication to slow, engineered labor. Here, the internal structure wasn't a hollow shaft, but a complex series of supports designed to hold a marble temple on a swampy foundation. The early 1910s saw the Army Corps of Engineers build not just a building, but the very ground beneath it. The construction began with the erection of enormous concrete piers, sunk 65 feet to the bedrock. Above these, the builders created a vast concrete and steel substructure. Imagine the work involved in placing the steel supports. Long, heavy iron I-beams arrived by rail, slowly being guided into position across the concrete maze. The riveters, whose work normally involved loud, sharp hammering, were kept to a minimum as the structural steel was encased in thick, slow-drying concrete. The entire site became a quiet, damp world of concrete mixing and curing.
The columns, each made of individual Colorado Yule marble drums, were hoisted onto the platform. These drums were massive, requiring the largest available steam cranes. The alignment was critical. Imagine the surveyor standing with his theodolite, a measuring instrument, making tiny, precise adjustments to the placement of the cable. The column drum would hang suspended, casting a silent, heavy shadow before being lowered with excruciating slowness, ensuring it fit perfectly onto the base below. The fit had to be flawless, relying on the stonemason's quiet skill to grind the surfaces to microscopic tolerances. This was a time not for haste, but for structural perfection. Every beam, every stone, and every measurement was double-checked. The mid-construction years were a prolonged meditation on weight, alignment, and enduring form. A perfect, soothing testament to the quiet effort that turns blueprints into forever. Let the gentle weight of this process ease your mind. We now leave the rhythmic creak of the scaffolding and enter a world of profound quiet. The studio and the final chamber where the colossal figures and historic words slowly emerge from cold stone. This phase of construction is not defined by brute force, but by patience, silence, and the almost meditative repetition of the chisel. We focus our attention on the Lincoln Memorial, where the final artistic soul of the structure was born. The gentle transformation from clay to colossus. The most iconic piece of work here is the seated statue of Abraham Lincoln, designed by sculptor Daniel Chester French. However, the statue wasn't carved directly on site.
Its creation began miles away in a quiet studio. French first created small, meticulous plaster models, then a massive, full-scale plaster cast. This process, spanning years, was a silent struggle of form and expression. Imagine the sculptor in his studio, standing before the gigantic plaster model. He is not striking marble yet, but simply adjusting the drapery, studying the hands, ensuring that the finished figure would convey both Lincoln's determination, clenched left hand, and his compassion, open right hand. This slow, concentrated process ensured that the final stone version was spiritually complete before the first chisel touch. The quiet choreography of the Picciarelli brothers. The actual carving of the colossal statue was entrusted to the Picciarelli brothers in their studio in the Bronx, New York. They were not mere stone cutters, they were master artisans who used a technique of transferring the plaster model's measurements to the stone with microscopic accuracy. Listen for the sound of the pointing machine, a simple yet ingenious tool. It uses a series of calipers and needles to transfer thousands of reference points from the tip of Lincoln's beard to the fold of his coat, from the plaster to the waiting block of Georgia white marble. Imagine the gentle click of the measuring needles finding their depth, a sound of absolute precision. The statue itself was carved from 28 separate blocks of marble. The work was divided among the brothers, each taking on a different section, working for hours in quiet, disciplined effort. The tools are simple. The pneumatic hammer is used gently to remove large masses of stone, followed by various sizes of chisels and rasps for smoothing and detailing. The air is thick with the fine, clean dust of marble. The final surfacing was done with files and abrasive sand, often applied by hand, slowly polishing the stone until it achieves the luminous, reflective quality that French desired. It is a work of slow subtraction, where thousands of tiny, measured movements revealed the figure hidden within the rock. The etching of eternal words. Beyond the sculpture, the walls of the chamber had to be inscribed with Lincoln's immortal texts, the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural address. Imagine the stonecutters working high up on the wall, not with chisels, but with fine-tipped instruments. First, the chosen text was carefully laid out by hand, the letters drawn precisely onto the stone surface. Then the carver would begin the slow process of incising the letters. The tool used is often a V-chisel, designed to cut a deep, crisp trough that casts a shadow and makes the words readable from a distance. The rhythm is steady and soft, tap, tap, tap. Each letter, each serif, each curve required hundreds of small, controlled strikes. There could be no error. A mistake meant grinding down the entire section of the wall and starting over. The task demanded total, unwavering focus, a perfect environment for your mind to settle and quiet. These are the sounds of history being written, not with a pen, but with the quiet, persistent effort of a skilled hand against the unyielding stone.
The beauty of these finishes is a testament to the fact that the greatest monument requires the greatest calm. Let the quiet focus of the master carvers wash over you, pulling you deeper into a peaceful rest. This is not a story of triumphant crowds and dramatic speeches, but of the meticulous, unhurried transfer of ownership. The moment a monument ceases to be a construction project and becomes a national landmark, all recorded in the official registers. The finality of the Washington Monument's apex. For the Washington Monument, the final touch was intensely focused, yet quiet, the placement of the aluminum capstone. In December 1884, after decades of sporadic work, the team led by the Army Corps of Engineers reached the zenith. The physical completion of the shaft was documented with painstaking, nearly bureaucratic detail. Official records logged the precise time and date the small 8-pound aluminum pyramidion was set atop the 555-foot structure. This capstone was not merely decorative, it was functional, serving as a lightning rod. The records detail its precise composition, its grounding system, and the names of the engineers responsible for its final placement. Imagine the ledger entry recording the consumption of the final barrel of mortar, the dismantling of the last internal hoist, and the final sweep of the staircase. Every tool accounted for, every ledger balanced. Following completion, the monument entered a phase of quiet measurement and inspection. The Army Corps of Engineers submitted thick reports detailing the geological surveys, the settling rate of the foundation, and the precise mathematical calculations that verified the monument's perfect plumb line. These documents, full of dry numbers, cross-sections, and engineering sketches, are the monument's true final biography, a soothing testament to structural integrity over fanfare. The official transfer and the transcript. When the Washington Monument was formally dedicated in February 1885, the public event was indeed grand, but our focus rests on the administrative record of that day. Imagine the transcripts of the dedication ceremony. Pages and pages of tightly typed or carefully handwritten notes preserve the long speeches given by President Chester A. Arthur, the chairman of the Joint Commission, and various dignitaries. These were not short, snappy modern addresses. They were extended, formal recitations of history and duty. We dwell on the sheer length and formality of these texts, the repeated acknowledgments, the formal titles, the dense paragraphs of historical context. For the exhausted mind seeking rest, the monotony of these preserved words is the most soothing detail of all. The documents officially transfer title of the monument from the Washington National Monument Society and the Army Corps of Engineers to the federal government, establishing the dry, legal custodianship of the landmark for perpetuity. It is a quiet administrative handoff, a final, unhurried seal of approval.
The Lincoln Memorial, Custodianship and Conservation. The Lincoln Memorial, dedicated decades later in 1922, generated an equally immense paper trail. The final bureaucratic task here was the inventory of the artistic elements, the statue, the murals, and the inscriptions. The official logs detail the delivery of the finished bronze and glass grille, later changed to an open portal, the final assembly of the Georgia marble blocks that form the statue, and the precise date Jules Guérin's murals were permanently affixed above the inscriptions. The most calming documents, perhaps, are the conservation logs. These papers outline the type of protective wax applied to the marble statue, the specific ventilation systems installed to protect the interior from moisture damage, and the initial schedule for regular cleaning and maintenance. These records speak not of finality, but of perpetual calm care. The monument is finished, and now the quiet, unending work of preservation begins. A steady, predictable schedule of maintenance that requires no rush, only diligence. The monuments stand today not just as structures, but as physical proof of thousands of pages of official documentation and slow, quiet planning. Let the meticulous nature of these final logistics lead your thoughts to rest. We have accounted for every piece of stone, every log of construction, and every piece of final dedication paperwork. The last signature is dry, the final light is extinguished, and the iron gates are closed. But the most mind-blowing truth of these silent stone guardians is not what they are made of, but the profound effect they have on time itself. Imagine the Washington Monument standing under a starlit sky. For decades, it was simply a project, but now, fully documented and officially finished, it becomes something else, an anchor in eternity. The paper trail we followed,
the long, boring list of dates and measurements was not meant to record a single moment, but to ensure that the monument would withstand 1,000 generations. The stone, once lifted by human effort, now stands against the ages, virtually indifferent to the passage of a single day or even a single century. As you lie here, resting, let that enormous, slow stability be your final anchor. These monuments absorbed the hurry, the finance, the fighting, and the politics of their own making, and converted it all into quiet, unshakable permanence. You are listening to the history of something that is not moving, not changing, and not rushing. Find that same depth of rest within yourself. You are now sharing in the timeless, quiet confidence of the stone. Sleep now, and let your mind stand as firm and as silent as the guardians.